scratchy? I'm real scratchy, aren't I? Okay. Sorry about the scratchiness. If I can't get that away, just let me know. Good morning, everybody. Good to be with all of you. Isn't that such a beautiful thing to bear witness to? Just our kids, the way that they have such a vivacious faith. It's just so beautiful. Well, my name is Paul. I'm one of the co-lead pastors here at Newport Covenant Church. And a couple weeks ago, my grandmother passed away. But she passed away in one of the most beautiful ways I think that you can pass, that I think we all would kind of hope for. She had an opportunity to talk to all of her family. She had one-on-one conversations with each of her children. And then a few hours later, she very gently took her last breath and passed from this life to the next. And so when I headed to Des Moines, Iowa for her memorial service, it was certainly filled with grief. It's always hard to lose someone. But there was also a lot of joy and laughter, really, at kind of honoring the woman that she was and the way that she saw people and cared for people and always saw the good in people. And I don't know about you. You may do this more than I do, but traveling from Seattle to Des Moines is a little complicated. I'm not sure. I'll give you the inside scoop. There's no direct flight from here to Des Moines, Iowa. Des Moines is not like a really, great place to vacation. Sorry, my relatives live there. They understand. Anyway, so it's a little bit difficult to get to Des Moines, Iowa. And so I was flying from here in Seattle to Chicago first for a layover and then heading out to Des Moines. And so I'm sitting at my gate getting ready to head from Seattle to Chicago. And there's this person that kind of catches my attention wearing a suit coat and has kind of a small, entourage around them. I'm like, this is kind of interesting. And I look up and I'm like, that's Governor Jay Inslee. Here is Jay Inslee standing here at the airport. This is crazy. So I text Britta, my wife, and say, guess what? I think Jay Inslee is going to be on my flight. This is so cool. And so, we're kind of geeking out about it a little bit and wow, we got to say hello and whatever. So I go to the bathroom because we're about to board, and I come back and he's gone. And so I'm like, what a kind gesture to come and greet people on their way, to go, what a nice thing for a governor to do. Just visiting the airport to have a great trip. This is what you do. You just start to justify these things in your head, just figuring out what's going on. So as it happened, because it was kind of a quick turnaround to purchase these flights, I happened to be sitting in an exit row this particular trip. And so as I get on the plane and board, I recognize in seats B and C of my A are Governor Inslee and his wife, Trudy. And I am sitting in 17A. And so I say, excuse me, I'm in there, and, sit down, and I'm like, Britta, guess what? You'll never believe what's happening. And so I'm like, I'm sitting, right next to the Inslees. You can't, that's crazy. They're playing Wordle, you would never believe. So, right, so, she's like, you have to talk to them. I'm like, I'm not going to talk to them. She's like, get a picture. I'm like, I don't want to be that creepy guy, right? I don't want to take, so here's the picture I took after we landed. And if you zoom in there, yep, that's him. Right, you just don't want to be that guy. So I was apparently this guy that takes a picture of the back of his head. But on the plane, I was like, oh man, here's this person that you see on TV, right? You've seen them talk about stuff, and you're that they're real people, right? But that they're real people, they're actually having conversations, and he's answering phone calls, and it's this is crazy, I'm right here. But I really didn't want to be that guy. And so for the most of the flight, I was just watching my movie, right? Just kind of I'll put my headphones in, I'll let them, I'm sure they get so much stuff all the time, I'll just let them be. And so as we then descend and we land on the tarmac in Chicago, I'm not sure if you've ever flown into Chicago, but the taxi from landing to the gate can sometimes be 15, 20, sometimes it can take an hour. It wasn't that long. But it was about a 15, 20-minute taxi. And so as we land on the tarmac and kind of everything is going and we're starting to make our way to the gate, he leans over and says, hi, my name's Jay, and this is my wife, Trudy. Who are you? My name's Paul. Nice to meet you. So we start talking a little bit, and he asks, where are you headed? And I describe him heading to Des Moines to visit for my grandmother's memorial. They're very kind, receiving. I said, well, where are you headed? And he said, we're off to the Democratic National Convention, and here is a T-shirt that I purchased for the vice presidential candidate, Tim Walz, who I'm going to give to this evening. What? Like, you can't make this stuff up. Like, it's just like, here they are going to the Democratic National. These are like people that are doing stuff. Like, it's crazy. And so we're talking back and forth, and eventually it comes up, what do you do? What is your job? And so I described, well, I'm a pastor in Washington. Well, where are you at? And I said, in Bellevue at Newport Covenant Church. And so we have a special guest. I'm totally kidding. Wouldn't that be crazy if they were here? Maybe they're watching. You just never know. So I described that we were here. And then this is just, like, if this story couldn't get more wild. As we're getting ready to kind of get up and get off the plane and disembark, Governor Inslee, Jay, as I now call him, he says, I've heard this thing quoted a couple different times. And I've heard it a couple different ways. And so I'm wondering, could you help me know the right way for these words to go? He says, what does the Lord require of you? That you would do justice and love mercy and walk humbly with God. My jaw was like, what? Are you kidding me? Like, you can't make this stuff up. I mean, you could make this stuff up. I'm not making this stuff up. I have picture evidence to show Jay Inslee's head that I was actually there meeting his wife, Trudy, and he. And so it was just flabbergasting to me. First of all, God is at work in ways we could never possibly comprehend. Right? Like that, how could you ever script that I'm going to sit next to the governor of our state and be able to talk to him about the passage we're going to be talking about this morning? Right? Like, it just doesn't happen. And so for no other reason, I was so grateful because it helped me remember my position in the world. Right? That God is so much bigger and beyond anything that I could possibly comprehend. God is at work in each of our lives in ways that, like, we could never even fathom the kinds of things that God is up to, weaving together our stories, helping us to see one another in different ways, inviting us to learn from each other. I was just so taken aback by the work that God does and kind of putting myself in my place. God is so much bigger than anything that I think that I can do. And so it was just a helpful thing for me. But the other thing that really struck me was the governor of Washington. And essentially, he was asking the question, what does this mean? What does it mean for us to love mercy and do justice and walk humbly with God? How does that work for us? How are we to understand those words? And I think when we hear this passage, or you hear maybe that we're going to be talking about love, mercy, do justice, you might have the same kind of questions. You might be asking, like, what exactly are we talking about? And clearly, these words are quite well known, right? The governor of our state has heard these words before and can quote them to me. So these words are quite widespread, but there's a beautiful thing to that God is at work spreading these words. But also, I think sometimes when we hear these words over and over and over again, it's easy for them to kind of become just these platitudes. Those sound really nice. That's a good sentiment, but what does it actually mean? What does it actually mean for us to love mercy and do justice? And this summer, we formalized our ministry team, Love, Mercy, and Do Justice. And we've gotten a lot of questions from people like, what do you do? What exactly is loving mercy and doing justice? And so my main aim this morning is I want to bring this to the ground a little bit for us. I want to make this a little bit more accessible for us to kind of wrestle with what does it actually mean for us to love mercy and to do justice. And I want us to be able to kind of touch this a little bit all together because I think justice and mercy are really big. And they're really big concepts. And so it can either feel overwhelming, like there's no way I could even begin that, or like, man, that's so big, I kind of want to just keep that at arm's length. And so we're going to kind of just draw in close and be invited into how do we bring this on the ground for us. And so this Love, Mercy, Do Justice ministry team, as we were forming, there were a number of different classes we did to kind of engage in some resources and hear some things. And one of the resources that our denomination pointed us to is a video made by a group called the Bible Project. Is anybody familiar with the Bible Project? If you aren't, they're super helpful. It's these two guys that are animators, so we get to watch Sunday morning cartoons. Pretty great. They're these animators, and they just have a really good way of communicating things succinctly and to help kind of give you an overview of different concepts. They do Bible book introductions. They talk about different themes. And so this theme in particular is talking about justice. Now, normally, I don't show a whole video clip because I'm not sure if you know this or not, but I'm relatively long-winded. And so I'm not going to give up my airtime for a video. But this video is 6 minutes long, so I'm letting you know that now. And it is very helpful because it really describes what are we talking about when we talk about justice? And what's a biblical understanding of justice? Because I think it's so big, right? Love, mercy, do justice. What exactly does that mean? This helps, I think, frame for us what exactly are we talking about when we talk about biblical justice, or what is justice about? So, Daryl, go ahead and roll this. We'll watch this together, and we'll keep talking.
If you were a praying mantis, it would be socially acceptable to devour your mate.
And if you're a honey badger, you have no regard for other animals. You don't care.
If you're a panda with twins, it's normal to abandon one to take care of the other.
But if humans do any of these things, we would call it wrong, unfair, or unjust.
Yeah, why is that? Why do humans care so much about justice?
Well, the Bible has a fascinating response to that question. On page 1, humans are set apart from all other creatures as the image of God.
Yeah, God's representatives who rule the world by his definition of good and evil.
And this identity, it's the bedrock of the Bible's view of justice. All humans are equal before God and have the right to be treated with dignity and fairness no matter who you are.
And that would be nice if we all did that. But we know how the world really works.
And the Bible addresses that too. It shows how we are constantly redefining good and evil to our own advantage at the expense of others.
Yeah, self-preservation. And the weaker someone is, the easier it is to take advantage of them.
And so in the biblical story, we see this happening on a personal level, but also in families, and then in communities, and in whole civilizations that create injustice, especially towards the vulnerable. But the story doesn't end there. Out of this whole mess, God chose a man named Abraham to start a new kind of family. Specifically, Abraham was to teach his family to keep the way of the Lord by doing righteousness and justice.
Yeah, doing righteousness, that's a Bible word I don't really use, but what comes to mind is being a good person.
But what does that even mean, being good? The biblical Hebrew word for righteousness is tzedakah, and it's more specific. It's an ethical standard that refers to right relationships between people. It's about treating others as the image of God,
with the God-given dignity they deserve.
And this word justice, it's the Hebrew word mishpat. It can refer to retributive justice.
Like if I steal something, I pay the consequences.
Exactly. Yet most often in the Bible, mishpat refers to restorative justice. It means going a step further, actually seeking out vulnerable people who are being taken advantage of and helping them.
Yeah, some people call this charity.
But mishpat involves way more. It means taking steps to advocate for the vulnerable and changing social structures to prevent injustice.
So justice and righteousness are about a radical, selfless way of life.
Yeah, and you find this idea all over the Bible. Like here, in the book of Proverbs, what does it mean to bring about just righteousness?
Open your mouth for those who can't speak for themselves.
And what do these words mean for the prophets, like Jeremiah?
Rescue the disadvantaged, and don't tolerate oppression or violence against the immigrant, the orphan, and the widow.
And like here, look in the book of Psalms.
The Lord God upholds justice for the oppressed, gives food to the hungry, and sets the prisoner free. But he thwarts the way of the wicked. Whoa, he thwarts the wicked?
Yeah, in Hebrew, the word wicked is rasha. It means guilty or in the wrong. It refers to someone who mistreats another human, ignoring their dignity as an image of God.
So justice and righteousness is a big deal to God.
Yes, it's what Abraham's family, the Israelites, were to be all about. They ended up as immigrant slaves, being oppressed unjustly in Egypt. And so God confronted Egypt's evil, declaring them to be rasha, guilty of injustice. And so he rescued Israel. But the tragic irony of the Old Testament story is that these redeemed people went on to commit the same acts of injustice against the vulnerable. And so God sent prophets who declared Israel guilty.
But they weren't the only ones. There's injustice everywhere.
Yeah, some people actively perpetrate injustice. Others receive benefits or privileges from unjust social structures they take for granted. And sadly, history has shown that when the oppressed gain power, they often become oppressors themselves.
So we all participate in injustice, actively or passively, even unintentionally. We're all the guilty ones.
And so this is the surprising message of the biblical story. God's response to humanity's legacy of injustice is to give us a gift, the life of Jesus. He did righteousness and justice, and yet he died on behalf of the guilty. But then God declared Jesus to be the righteous one when he rose from the dead. And so now Jesus offers his life to the guilty so that they too can be declared righteous before God, not because of anything they've done, but because of what Jesus did for them.
The earliest followers of Jesus experienced this righteousness from God, not just as a new status, but as a power that changed their lives and compelled them to act in surprising new ways.
Yeah, if God declared someone righteous when they didn't deserve it, the only reasonable response is to go and seek righteousness and justice for others.
This is a radical way of life, and it's not always convenient or easy. It's courageously making other people's problems my problems.
This is what Jesus meant by loving your neighbor as yourself. It's about a lifetime commitment fueled by the words of the ancient prophet Micah. God has told you, humans, what is good, and what the Lord requires of you is to do justice, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God.
Isn't that so good? It was so helpful for me to see kind of the arc of the biblical story and to see how this is interwoven into how we understand Scripture, into what Jesus has done for us and calls us to do. And those words that they say that Micah the prophet fueled this movement of to love mercy and to do justice and to walk humbly with God. As you came in this morning and as you exit this morning, we have a list here of resources. And so these resources are opportunities for you to go a little bit deeper. And this video is on that list of resources. So if you want to watch this again, that's there. There are other video resources. There are films. There are books. I will be honest, another reason we watched this video is because when I receive a list like this, I'm really well-intentioned, like, oh, that's a great idea. And then I just, kind of put it away. So one of the things we really want to encourage you is this is a really helpful tool, not to become homework or a new syllabus for your next class, but if you're kind of wrestling with some of these things, you have some questions, this is a great tool to provide, and we'll have a different resource list each week in this series to point you to some of these other resources that our other preachers will bring so that you can engage in these things. So I really encourage you, this is on the Next at Newport as well, if you want to click the links directly, please engage with that, because I think it is a really helpful tool for us. And if you have questions about that, our LNDJ team, Love, Mercy, Do Justice team is ready to answer those with you. And so that video ends by talking about the prophet Micah being these fueled words that move us forward and how we understand to live this in the world. What does biblical justice look like? And so I want to turn us now to Micah 6, verses 6 through 8. Just to give some brief context, Micah was one of those prophets who was declaring important words to the people of God. And in particular, in Micah's time, there were leaders from Israel who were kind of the wealthy elite. And these wealthy elite individuals were taking advantage of the poor, the widow, and the oppressed. Important words for us to hear. And so as they were doing this, they were misrepresenting the character of God. They were misunderstanding who God is and what God desires for the image bearing of all people, that every person would be treated with human dignity, not to be a means to an end, but rather that people are to be in relationship. And so what we hear Micah talking about is he's talking to the people that what's happened is they have transformed the covenant with God into a contract. Instead of this being about right relationship with God and with each other, Micah is saying that you have transformed this covenant, which is a way that you relate to God and each other, into a contract. What must I do? We've made this transactional. If I put this in, then I get this out, and I'm good with God, and so everything is good. And in particular, these wealthy leaders thought, all the stuff that I have, what can I give in this stuff so that I'm in good standing with God? And so when we pick up in Micah 6, 6 to 8, it's actually a courtroom scene. If you have your Bible with you, I want to invite you to take it out and turn. It's in the Old Testament, right before the New Testament. If you don't have a Bible, there's a Bible in the pew in front of you or on your phone. It's just helpful to see some context. And in Micah chapter 6, you'll see the heading, it says, "The Lord's Case Against Israel." And so Micah is giving this imagery that the mountains will be the witness and setting up kind of this courtroom scene. And so that he then declares these words in Micah 6:6-8. And the words that are declared in verse 8 can sometimes feel like, man, that's a harsh punishment. But I want us to think instead about those words being an invitation to a restoration of the covenant relationship. That was a mouthful, but I want you to hear that. The invitation of Micah 6:8 is not so much a punishment, it's an invitation to return to covenant relationship. Okay? So here's what Micah says in Micah 6, verses 6-8. With what then shall I come before the Lord and bow down before the exalted God? Shall I come before him with burnt offerings, with calves a year old? Will the Lord be pleased with thousands of rams, with 10,000 rivers of oil? Shall I offer my firstborn for my transgression, the fruit of my body for the sin of my soul? Do you see how each of those offerings becomes bigger and bigger and bigger, grander and grander and grander? And so there's a bit of this tongue-in-cheek that the people of Israel are saying, what exactly is it you demand from me? What stuff do you want to take from me, God? Because they've treated their relationship with God as a contract. What do I have to give you? Is my firstborn child not enough? And so they're kind of lobbying this claim against God. And then here's God's response. He has shown you, O mortal, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you? To act justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. The word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. So Micah 6, verse 8 is really the meat of what we're talking about. Those other pieces in 6-7 are lobbying up this contract. And in verse 8, it's God's response to telling the people. And it says, he has shown you, O mortal, what is good. The O mortal is kind of the inverse of a royal we. Right? You know, when you talk about a royal we, you're talking about we think, and it's just talking about the individual person. The mortal is an inversion of that, and so it's the singular plural. Is that right? Singular. Do you get what I'm saying? When you say mortal, Micah is talking about all of humanity, right? And so where exactly has God told all of humanity what is good? If you look all the way back at the very first page, as the video says, look at the creation story in Genesis chapter 1. And so the way that God creates the world, the way in which God is at work, is after everything that he makes, each day, it says God called it good. And so the word that's used here, God has shown you, O mortal, all of humanity, what is good, is this Hebrew word tov. Now, I've talked about tov before, and I love tov, so bear with me. We're going to do a little bit of some digging in. When the people heard what has, O mortal, is that God has shown you what is good, what is tov, they immediately would have perked up to thinking back to when God talked at the beginning of creation. And after each day that God would create, he would call it good. He would call it tov. And as you move through chapter 1, when God creates humanity, he calls it very good. It is super tov. Humanity is super tov, very good. And a few verses before that, in Genesis 1:27, it says that God created humanity in God's image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. This working of saying the same thing 3 different ways right after one another is to drive home poetically, God has created humanity to bear God's image. And so each person is an image bearer of God. They hold dignity and humanity and goodness within themselves because God has created people to bear the image of God. And so when we hear people bearing as the image of God, our call and our charge, O humanity, O mortal, what is good, what is super tov, is to treat one another with respect. To see each other through the eyes of God, that each of us bears an image of God. We are all image bearers, and all of humanity bears a portion of the image of God. And so when we don't see someone, when we don't hear someone, when we don't learn from a person's experience, we miss something. We miss something of the image of God. Each of us is a bearer of the image of God. So this is what it says, O mortal, what is good. God has shown you what is good, what is tov. It is to recognize the image of God each one of us bear. And so then it asks this question, what then does the Lord require of me? What does the Lord require of you? And this is basically asking the question, so then, how is it that we are to live out honoring the image of God in one another? And you hear this grouping, these three couples of these words, to do justice, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with God. This is how we live out honoring the image of God that each of us bear. And so the first pair of this, each of these pairs, by the way, has a verb in it, right? To understand and bear witness to the image of God that each of us bear is something that's active. It's not something that kind of passively happens. In fact, if we kind of let things passively happen, we often are in problem of not bearing the image of God for each other. Or it's easy for us to not honor the way that God has created another person. And so these are active verbs. And so the first set is to do justice. The word do there is a word that means to do or to make. And to do or to make ties perfectly back to that creation language, right? That when God made things, to do things, he's making something. And so when it says to do justice, it's this making or this doing something. And so it's a creative work. To do justice is a creative work. And it's a creative work to engage in justice. And the word for justice is the word we saw in the video, mishpat, right? Which is that Hebrew word that has to do with sometimes retributive justice, which is you stole something, you'll pay the punishment. But the other way to understand mishpat and how it's used here is restorative justice. And I loved the way that they framed what that means in the video. And so I want to read you these words, what it means for restorative justice. It's to seek out vulnerable people who are being taken advantage of and helping them. Advocating for the vulnerable and changing social structures to prevent injustice. So mishpat, restorative justice, is seeing the needs of other people and working to restore that broken relationship, working to repair that space. So doing justice is creative work to engage with restoring one another and restoring how we bear the image of God together. And so I want you to hold in your mind, I'm going to tell a story in just a moment. I want you to hold in your mind the word repair. So when we think about doing justice, think about that word repair, okay? Then it goes on to say doing justice and loving mercy. Now, as I described to Jay, loving mercy is the word loving chesed. I'm confessing to all of you, I was very nervous when Jay Inslee had said, could you tell me about what it means to love mercy? Like, I've heard that a couple different ways. And so I actually said, well, it's actually the word chesed. But because I was kind of nervous, it kind of got caught in my throat. It was like, chesed. And I like coughed. He's, like wiping his face. It's like, oh man. Yeah. So full confession, I may have spit on Jay Inslee. Not on purpose, but it just kind of came out of my mouth as I was saying the word chesed. My goodness gracious. So I was describing then, because he said, I've heard that talked about as love or kindness or mercy. And I was saying chesed is this really beautiful word that actually encapsulates all of those things. And so if you look back, if you remember in June, we covered a series on Jonah. And do you remember in Jonah, we talked about the big fish that eats Jonah? And when it eats Jonah, it goes down deep and draws in close. It's this really expansive love of God. And it's the love of God that extends infinitely in every direction, right? Like you can't get any bigger. It's just massively expansive. This is the word hesed that's used in Jonah. It's the same word here, love, hesed. Essentially what Micah is saying is love, love. Love doing love. Let love be a part of what characterizes who you are as a people. And hesed goes beyond just talking about the expansive-ness of God's love. The reason it uses the word mercy is because it's talking about the kind of relationship God has with humanity. There are things, as the video pointed out, there are things we don't deserve. There are things we do deserve that we don't receive. And so the mercy of God, the love of God, seeks to be in right relationship with God. But not because we've done something right, but because God has sought to reconcile that relationship with us. And so when Micah says love hesed, love, love, it's this establishment of coming back into right relationship with each other. It's mercy that shows that we love and care for each other even when it doesn't actually make sense. In some ways, to show that kind of love feels crazy from the outside. There are a number of different stories that I could share, and I want to encourage you to think of your own story of a way in which you've received love that you didn't deserve. Right? Where you felt someone saw you or picked you up or cared for you in a way that just opened your eyes to that's radical love. That's expansive in every direction kind of love. This is the love hesed that Micah is talking about. And so then we get to the third pair of walk humbly. And it's interesting, whenever we talk about this kind of concept, we talk about love, mercy, do justice. I quite frankly don't know why we flipped the order. Maybe love, mercy, do justice sounds better than do justice, love, mercy. But the reason walk humbly is not there isn't because the acronym LMDJWH is too long, though it is too long, but it's because love, mercy, and do justice talk about how we have reconciled relationship with each other. How are we to reconcile in our relationships together? And the third pair, walk humbly, is a way for us to understand our relationship with God. And the most kind of clean translation for us to understand in English is to move with reverence for God's purposes in the world. Walking humbly with God is to move with reverence for God's purposes for the world. It's recognizing that God is God. God is the one who seeks to be in reconciled relationship with us and has created each person to bear an image of God. And so to walk humbly with God is to move with reverence for God's purposes in the world. And so that's undergirding everything that we do. And so that's why we talk about these things as love, mercy, and do justice. Now, our denomination, the Evangelical Covenant Church, has a department called Love, Mercy, Do Justice. And this department has existed for probably 3 or 4 decades. And when it first emerged, or maybe not first, but one of its iterations, the department was originally called Compassion, Mercy, and Justice. Compassion, Mercy, and Justice. And the woman who led this particular department, her name is Debbie Blue. Debbie Blue is a giant of faith. She is spiritually just blows you away when you're in her presence. You cannot help but feel the radiating love of God when you sit next to her. She doesn't have to say a thing. You just know, man, God loves me because Debbie's right here. I just know. And I consider it a great honor and a great privilege to call her a spiritual mentor and a family member of the family of God. And so as Debbie Blue would talk about this department, Compassion, Mercy, and Justice, people would often ask the question, what does that mean? What does it mean to have compassion, mercy, and justice? And so she would tell this story. It's a parable that many may know. And so she would tell this parable to help kind of describe the difference between compassion and mercy and justice. And so she would describe it this way. She said, compassion, mercy, and justice is like this. It's like a person who lives in a village near a river. And as this person is in the village near the river, they're out one day for a walk in the forest nearby the bank of the river, and they hear someone calling for help because someone has fallen into the water. And so the person, moved with compassion, goes and helps that person come up out of the water to rescue them from the moving current that they couldn't rescue themselves from. And Debbie says, this is compassion. Now, this villager the next day is walking again through the forest and hears 2 more people crying out for help, saying, please come and help me. Come and help get us out of this situation that we can't get ourselves out of. And so the person, this villager, goes into the water and helps pull out these other 2 people. And as the person pulls out the other 2 people, they start to think to themselves, this is becoming like kind of regular. And so they start to go back to their village and say, we need to establish a way for us to care for the needs of these people that keep falling into the river. And so they create some space to show and care for the basic needs of these people who have fallen into the river. And Debbie would say, this is mercy. This is loving love. And so then she goes on to continue the story to say this villager is again walking and starts to think to themselves, you know, this is happening on a semi-regular basis. And so this villager, they walk upstream, they travel upstream. And as they go upstream, they see that there's a bridge that has broken between 2 sides of the bank. And so the villager realizes this is the part of the problem. This is why people keep falling in. They're trying to cross from one side to another, and they keep falling in. And so the villager returns to her village and finds people that are there to help, and they all come back and they repair the bridge. There are people who understand the system, they're maybe civic engineers, and they work to repair the bridge so that people can get across from one side to the other. And Debbie says, this is justice. Compassion, mercy, and justice. Loving mercy and doing justice is creative work to repair broken bridges. Justice is the creative work of repairing broken bridges. It's seeking to address unjust systems. It's seeking to engage in policies that keep people oppressed or keep people down. That's why when we talk about loving mercy and doing justice, we talk about some of these systemic issues, because it's a seeking to attend to something that has been broken, a system that is keeping people from crossing to the other side. Loving mercy and doing justice is about loving love. It's about loving chesed, the expansive love of God. It's about bringing people into care and meeting the needs that we see, to making sure that people are able to find what they need. If they're hungry or they're hurting, we draw people in. We love love. And loving mercy and doing justice is about having compassionate eyes, to see with compassion someone else's circumstance or situation, and helping them out of the moving water that they cannot help themselves out of, to get close to them, to hear their story, to see them, to understand what's going on in their life. And so at its core, at the very kind of ground level of loving mercy and doing justice, the shorthand that we use, at its core, loving mercy and doing justice is about seeing the image of God that each of us bear and pursuing God's goodness in ourselves and for our neighbors. That's a lot of words, and so I want to say that one more time. At its core, loving mercy and doing justice is about seeing the image of God that each of us bear and pursuing God's goodness in ourselves and for our neighbors. And the really beautiful part about this is that every one of us participates in that. Every one of us gets to seek to see the image of God in other people. In the way we interact with people in the grocery store, in how we talk to people at school, in the way that we honor people in the workplace, in the way we hear from another person's story, each of us has the opportunity to love mercy and to do justice, to see the image of God that each of us bear. It's how we spend our time. It's how we spend our words. It's how we attend to our relationships with one another. Can you think of anything that may be coming up that could be divisive? Can you think of anything in our life that might be polarizing or pulling people away or causing people to other people? You see, the call and the charge for us in loving mercy and doing justice is to see God's image that each person bears, hearing their story, believing their story, and coming alongside them. There are some who will engage this further, and that is what our Love, Mercy, Do Justice ministry team is all about. It's a group of people who are committed to saying, we want to be kind of scouts to go on the way, to say, what does it look like for us as a community to honor the image of God of one another? And so this team is working to equip and resource all of us so that we could be better image bearers and better bearers of image. Did that work? Image bearers and bearers of image. Yeah, sure. That we bear the image of God in other people. So this is what our Love, Mercy, Do Justice team is seeking to do, is to help point us in those directions, to be those scouts to help us to see better. And there are some who are called with a prophetic voice, who are like Micah, who call out about injustice, who draw our attention to things that probably we'd rather not have our attention drawn to. Over these next 3 weeks, I believe that we have some prophetic voices that we'll have a chance to hear from. Now, I will admit, when I hear some prophetic words, I get a little squirmy in my seat. Right? It can feel uncomfortable, and sometimes I'm uncertain. I don't know what I think about that. I'm not sure how that settles with me. And so, as one of your pastors, I really want you to hear, please attend to that space. Be bold and courageous. It doesn't mean you have to agree with everything that's said. It doesn't mean you have to think this is the best sermon series in the world. It doesn't mean your whole life is going to change, though I think it will. What it does mean is attend to that space. Seek to come with curiosity. Seek to come listening to what maybe you haven't heard before, or maybe there's an invitation that you're not sure that you've ever received before. That we're not doing this to make you uncomfortable, but rather what we're doing is we're seeking to say, how can we better bear the image of God ourselves and see the image of God that others bear? And so next week, you'll have a chance to hear from Reverend Dr. Andy Larson. And Andy is closely associated, was on staff actually before here at Newport Covenant Church. And so he is coming to talk to us about peace or holistic shalom, the wholeness that God brings about. And Andy works with a lot of different people in the Middle East. And so he will come and share a message for us during our Sunday service. And then afterwards, Jordan and Angie are going to make incredible food, so you can't say no to that. So we'll have some burgers next week. And as you're grabbing food, then we'll be invited to come back in here into the sanctuary and to hear from Andy and his wife, Kari, as they tell us some stories of their recent experiences in the Middle East, and then have some chance for us to ask some questions, to kind of wrestle with some of the words that Andy will bring to us. The following week, we'll have a chance to hear from our superintendent, which just means that they're the pastor to all of the kind of local area churches, Greg Yee, and he will be preaching about the whole mission of the church. What does it mean for us to understand that's one of our distinctives as a denomination, to honor the whole mission of the church? What does that look like for us? How do we practically live that out as a congregation? And then the last week in September, we're going to have a chance to hear from Lenore Three Stars, who is Ogalla Lakota, and she will tell us about how is your relationship to the land? How do you understand humans' relationship to creation and to the land? And so after the service that week, we'll have a chance to have a meal together again that will represent a number of different cultures that are represented in our congregation. It's going to be really fun and awesome. If you have questions about that, or if you'd like your culture to be represented, please come talk to us. We'd love to kind of honor all the different cultures and the diversity that God has in our community. And so all of these things are going to be happening in these next 3 weeks. And each week, our Love, Mercy, and Do Justice team will be out at the table helping to ask if you have questions. Quite frankly, if you're uncomfortable or you're feeling like, I don't know, they're also there for that. They're there to just have some conversations, to be honest and transparent about those things. We're here for that. Come and talk to us. Come and talk to me. We want you to be able to have space to speak into these things together and to come with your honest wrestlings. So please just hear me. Please discern with God how you might be invited to engage, even if it's just looking at the resource list that you might not have looked at before. We're coming next week if you might not have. And so just trust that God is at work in our community, calling us to love, mercy, and do justice. What does the Lord require of us? O mortals, God has shown you what is good. To love mercy and to do justice and to walk humbly with our God. Would you pray with me? God, we thank you that you are a God who is at work seeing the importance of each person that you have created. And God, we know that it is easy sometimes to press into division or to be a stick in the mud or to put our foot on the ground. And so, God, I do pray for your Spirit to right now be tilling that soil of our soul. To perhaps even be breaking up some fallow ground in myself, in all of us, as we seek to hear and know more of your goodness and to see more of your image. So God, open our eyes to your presence in our midst and call us to love, to do the creative work of restorative justice, and to move with reverence for your purposes in the world, we pray.